death, and design in Dolmenwood on today's Plays the Thing. Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. Today, we continue to discuss Dolmenwood, the dark and whimsical fairy tale role-playing game written by Gavin Norman and published through his company, Necrotic Gnome. More specifically, this is the setup for the third play report for Winter's Daughter, which is a starter adventure also written by Gavin Norman for the setting. Now, initially, I'd intended this video to be both the setup and the play report, but the video got long, so I've separated it into two videos. This video will give you a little bit of a recap and then a reminder of what the trauma was and a discussion of how I approached addressing the trauma. I'll have to leave the discussion of play for another time. Before we dive into the setup though, if you enjoy this content, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon to get notified whenever I post something new. All right, so first, that recap I promised. In previous sessions, the reclusive wizard Mosselmeyer Druge hired Cephas the fighter, Mordrin the cleric, Sandy, who's also a fighter, Gwendy the hunter, and Nia the bard to travel into the wood, find the burial mound of the legendary Sir Chide, take a ring from the hero's corpse, and deliver said ring to the wizard in Prigwood. Upon arriving at the site, the heroes met another PC, Osbert the friar, who joined them in exploring the mound. In the mound, they encountered various oddities, including the ghosts of Sir Chide's parents, and they also made it to the antechamber of Sir Chide's tomb, guarded by a pair of stone hounds. Sadly, the Guardians attacked the heroes and killed Nia. Those of you who watched the previous video know that Nia's death caused some unwanted trauma at the table, with one of the players opting out for the night and everybody, perhaps especially me, feeling that the game didn't suit the expectations of people at the table. In short, it wasn't all that fun by the end of the night. Now let me be clear, I'm not saying that Dolmenwood suffers from poor design. Indeed, I am certain that the game perfectly matches the expectations and sensibilities and preferences of its designer, and probably that of most OSR enthusiasts who enjoy having death at the table as a possible outcome at all times. And while I think the game's aesthetic emphasizes whimsy over grit most of the time, darkness and danger indeed lurk in the setting as presented, and I can see a high lethality meshing well with a what fools these mortals be sensibility that's definitely there for anybody who wants to pick up on it. Since character creation in Dolmenwood is quick and easy, character death does not have to halt play. Spend a few minutes chucking some dice and picking some gear and picking some spells, and you can be back in action in no time. My group can and does enjoy that style of play in some instances, but that's not what they wanted here. I saw this problem coming, I ignored it, and for that, I failed as a GM. The truth is that this really did bother me, and I began thinking about how to address the situation the moment the session ended. Fortunately, serendipitously, a resource presented itself to me the very next day in the form of, oh no, not Blackleaf, which is a recorded workshop about player character death that's produced by Ron Edwards and available for purchase over at Adept Play. I really recommend that you check it out along with all the free resources that are over on that site. Watching the video as I stewed over our session of Dolmenwood led me to think about several things. First, I started thinking about the varied history of PC death and TTRPGs. I thought about the different ways that PC death can impact the game emotionally, thematically, mechanically. I thought about the fact that player death is one way of creating meaningful consequences in play, but it's not the only way. And finally, I started to think about how perhaps often character death distracts from what truly matters in a particular game. Listening to Oh No Not Blackleaf also made me think about some of Ron Edwards' games. Champions Now was the first that popped to mind. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and in this superhero TTRPG, meaningful play is generated very effectively, but player death is kept as elective by the player when the emergent fiction suggests that death is a possibility. Another of Ron's games that came to mind is Circle of Hands, which is a very, very gritty Iron Age fantasy game that does not match what I envision for Dolmenwood at all, but it has an interesting death mechanic, and that is that any player character killed in action becomes a revenant that fights on to the conclusion of the session's venture before it dies for good. And then finally, there's Ron's game Fantasy for Real, which is much closer to what I envision in tone for Dolmenwood. In that game, the player makes an Elan roll whenever a PC death occurs. Failure means that the character dies, but that death is ambiguous, kind of like the equivalent of falling into a sarlacc pit. The next time you play, that character can show up again, and if asked how they survived, the only explanation necessary is a wide-eyed and traumatized "don't ask." So thinking about Ron's workshop and games made it easier for me to break away from the notion that changing the lethality of Dolmenwood would betray the play experience. There's no essential, pure, and correct way of playing a game like Dolmenwood, so what I should be doing is asking, what does my group want from our Dolmenwood experience? And if the game's design doesn't serve that desired experience, if it isn't fun in the ways we want it to be fun, then redesigning that game should be an option. Thus resolved to address the situation, I set myself to thinking about what I needed to do to bring our Dolmenwood game in line with our player expectations, but also how to do so without erasing the consequences of actions taken by players and characters in the context of our situation of play. In other words, I didn't want to damage the integrity of play by doling out plot armor to ensure that the story unfolds in some predetermined fashion. So, what to do? In trying to answer that question, I turned to think more deeply about what had actually happened during play and how the situation established by the published adventure might interact with the situations my players had introduced into our game through their characters. Doing so reminded me of three things. The first is that, as written, Winter's Daughter includes several ways to rescue characters from death. Indeed, one of the reasons that I kept the game going after Nia's death and Mario's walking out and all of that was that there were magical healing wafers in the immediate vicinity. And since Dolmenwood's optional death rules state that a dead character's spirit will hang around for 3 rounds, there was a slight chance that the player characters could have found those wafers and used them to heal Nia. That did not work out, of course. But even without that working out, there are other things in the adventure that might come into play. And here is a spoiler. Sir Chide's beloved, the Fey princess whose name is Snowfall at Dusk, has the fairy rune Unravel Death. She can only use this once in her lifetime, but the adventure says that under the right circumstances, she'd be willing to reward the players through its use. Finally, the princess has the amulet of Ruvanaith, which can grant a mortal 1 wish. So all of that is the first thing that I thought of, and that is, my gosh, this adventure actually has quite a few ways to cheat death written into it. The second factor that came to mind as I reviewed everything was the backdrop established by the adventure text. In that backdrop, Sir Chide and Snowfall at Dusk exchanged engagement rings 600 years ago, binding their souls together. After Sir Chide's death, the retreating cold prince grabbed his daughter, dragged her into the Fey realm, imprisoned her in a tower, and refused to let her go until she renounced her love for Sir Chide. Of course, she refused to do that. And the bond that exists between them through their rings is literally pulling the Fey realm and Dolmenwood closer together, damaging the veil between worlds. That's what caused the crack and the eerie sheet of ichor in the tomb. The adventure hints that this situation is also why Sir Chide's parents can't pass on to their eternal life. So I got to thinking, if that situation is holding back Sir Chide's parents from passing on, might that situation not also prevent Nia's spirit from moving on? The third factor that I remembered is the backstory that Mike had established for Nia during character generation. Now, to be clear, I do not encourage overwrought backstories for player characters, but a little bit of interest is good. And in generating the backstory for his character, or the situation of play for his character, Mike had said that Nia was an ordinary young girl who got lost in the woods for a few weeks and returned from that experience distracted, spouting strange lore, and behaving in such a way that she could justify the profession of bard. The clear implication is that she is Fey touched in some way, but we didn't flesh that out before play. It was just something that affected the way that she behaved during play. Ruminating over this backstory made me think of one of the hooks that is included in Winter's Daughter, which is that the Fey princess will appear to a player character in dreams, and that player character would fall so in love with her that they feel compelled to find Sir Chide's tomb. I hadn't selected this hook because I didn't think my players would enjoy it, and it just seems a little too railroady for me, but I thought about it now because it establishes the idea that the princess can indeed reach out beyond the Fey realm, that she can affect mortals, and if she could, in theory, make a mortal fall completely in love with her from across the veil, maybe she could also scramble a young girl's mind and give her hidden lore so that she might eventually be nudged towards some strange fate, albeit retroactively. In other words, I wouldn't have been interested in telling Mike, you have to go on this mission because you're compelled by this princess to do so, but given where we are in play, I'm okay with reaching into that backstory and saying, wait a minute, we can activate those elements of backstory, both Nia's and the adventures, to make something happen here. So with these thoughts in place, I prepared for our next session. I don't have time to tell you how play actually went in this video, so tune in next time to hear how it all unfolded. In the meantime, I thank you so much for sticking around until the end. I ask you to please remember to like the video if you did, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon to keep notified. But more than anything, I would like to wish you what I always do, which is that I wish you good health, I wish you good cheer, I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.